It was Halloween night, and my friends Mark, Sarah, and I were buzzing with excitement. For weeks we had meticulously planned our candy collecting route, determined to hit every house in our small neighborhood. Dressed in our costumes, Mark as a ghost, Sarah as a witch, and I as a vampire, we set out with our bags, ready for a night of trick-or-treating. The streets were alive with laughter and the sound of children scurrying from house to house, their voices echoing in the crisp autumn air. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the faint smell of bonfires and the glow of jack-o'-lanterns lighting up the sidewalks. Each house we approached was a gateway to sugary treasures, and we felt invincible as we filled our bags with candy. As we walked, we shared stories of the spooky legends surrounding our town, daring each other to knock on the doors of the houses rumored to be haunted. "You remember the old man who lived on Maple Street?" Mark said, his eyes wide. "They say he turned into a werewolf every Halloween night." "Yeah, and what about the woman who supposedly haunts the cemetery?" Sarah chimed in, shivering at the thought. "I heard she still searches for her lost children." As the night wore on, our excitement grew, and we decided to venture deeper into the neighborhood, toward the older houses that were said to have the best treats. There was one house in particular that stood out, a decrepit old Victorian that loomed at the end of a darkened street. It had been abandoned for years, but every Halloween we'd heard stories of a mysterious figure who handed out candy to brave trick-or-treaters. "Let's check it out," Mark suggested, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Sarah hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you sure? That place is creepy. I heard it's haunted." "Come on, it'll be fun," I chimed in, eager to show I wasn't afraid. "We can just take a quick look." With a mix of excitement and trepidation, we made our way down the street. The air grew colder, and the cheerful sounds of the neighborhood faded into an eerie silence. As we approached the house, its chipped paint and broken windows made it look even more sinister than we had imagined. The porch creaked under our weight as we climbed the steps, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Okay, who's going to knock?" Sarah asked, glancing around nervously. "I'll do it," Mark said, puffing out his chest. He stepped forward and knocked on the heavy door, the sound echoing through the stillness. We waited, holding our breath, half expecting the door to swing open. Moments passed, and just as we were about to give up, the door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit foyer. An elderly woman stood at the threshold, her face obscured by shadows. "Trick or treat," we said in unison, our voices a mix of excitement and fear. The woman smiled, revealing crooked teeth, and reached into a bowl beside her. "Come in, children. I have something special for you." With a shared glance of hesitation, we stepped inside, the door closing behind us with an ominous thud. The interior was just as we had feared, dusty and dimly lit, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. The smell of something sweet mixed with decay filled the air. The woman gestured for us to follow her into the living room, where the flickering light of a single lamp barely illuminated the space. She handed us each a handful of candy, but there was something unsettling about her presence. Her eyes seemed to glint with a hunger that made my stomach churn. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaky. "Be careful out there, children. Not everyone is as generous as I am," she warned, her smile fading into a grimace. "There are things in this world that should not be disturbed." We exchanged nervous glances, feeling an unsettling tension in the air. "We should go," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. As we turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped us in our tracks. "Oh, but you must try my special candy," she called, her voice now laced with a sinister undertone. "It's unforgettable." "No, thank you," Mark said quickly, stepping back. Suddenly the room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. I felt a strange pull, as if something was urging me to stay. The woman's eyes bore into mine, and I could feel a wave of dizziness wash over me. "Come now, children, just one taste," she beckoned, her voice sweet yet commanding. Before I could react, Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. "Run," he shouted, pushing through the doorway. We sprinted out of the house, adrenaline pumping through our veins. As we raced down the porch steps, I glanced back to see the woman standing in the doorway, her smile twisted into a malevolent grin, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Don't look back," Sarah yelled, and we didn't. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the street, our hearts pounding in our chests. The sounds of laughter and excitement returned as we stumbled back into the illuminated neighborhood, but the memory of that dark house lingered in our minds. "What just happened?" Sarah panted, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting the woman to follow us. "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. "But we need to tell everyone to stay away from that house." We regrouped with other trick-or-treaters, sharing our story, but most of them just laughed it off, calling it a Halloween prank. "You guys are just trying to scare us," one kid said, rolling his eyes. But I could see the fear in Mark's eyes mirrored my own. We had stumbled into something far more sinister than we had anticipated, and I was determined to avoid that house at all costs. As we continued our candy collection, the thrill of Halloween faded, replaced by a lingering dread. Every rustling leaf and gust of wind whispered warnings that only we could hear. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of the woman's glowing eyes haunted me. A year later, as Halloween approached, I still felt that familiar sense of dread. The memory of her twisted grin and dark promises lingered, refusing to let go. On Halloween night, I decided to stay in, hoping that ignoring the festivities would keep me safe from her reach. But the doorbell rang and my heart raced as I approached. Peering through the peephole, I saw a group of kids in costumes, ghosts, witches, and vampires gathered on my porch. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of my room caught my eye, and a chill ran down my spine. There in the darkness stood the old woman, her smile widening as she beckoned me closer. "You didn't think you could escape me, did you?" she whispered, her voice sweet yet dripping with malice. In that moment, I realized that she was not just a memory, she was a part of me now, a reminder that Halloween held more than just candy and costumes. It held the potential for darkness that could seep into the world if you let your guard down. With a trembling hand, I shut the door and backed away, the laughter of children fading into the background as I vowed never to forget the lesson I had learned that fateful night. Halloween was a night of magic and mischief, but it was also a night where the line between light and darkness could blur, and I was determined to never let it happen again. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon. For upcoming scary stories, we need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It was Halloween night, and the crisp October air carried the sounds of distant laughter and the faint rustling of leaves. I had spent the evening with my younger brother, Jack, carving pumpkins and handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. It had been a quiet night, the kind that left you feeling relaxed and a little nostalgic for the thrills of childhood. But as the hour grew late, an odd sense of anticipation crept into the air. The usual parade of costumed kids had slowed to a trickle, and now the street outside our house was silent. The porch lights of our neighbors flickered off one by one, signaling that Halloween was winding down. I leaned back on the couch, glancing out the window at the empty street. "Looks like we're done for the night," I said, tossing a handful of leftover candy into a bowl on the table. Jack, sitting across from me, nodded. "Yeah, I guess everyone's either at parties or gone home. Kind of boring compared to the old days, huh?" I chuckled. "Yeah, we used to get a lot more trick-or-treaters, but I think Halloween's gotten too commercial or something. People don't seem to care like they used to." And just as I was about to turn off the porch light, the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk outside caught our attention. We both turned toward the window. A figure was approaching a man walking slowly down the street, illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights. "Looks like we've got one last visitor," Jack said, raising an eyebrow. Kind of late, though. I squinted, watching the man's silhouette as he drew closer. Something about the way the man moved was unsettling. and his steps were deliberate, almost mechanical, and his figure was tall, unnaturally so. His face was obscured by the shadows, but the dim street light revealed that he was wearing an old-fashioned suit, the kind you might see in a black and white movie from the 1930s. "That's a weird costume," I muttered. "You think he's out trick-or-treating this late?" Jack shrugged. "Maybe. Should we open the door?" I hesitated. Something about the man didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it, but there was a strange heaviness in the air, as if the arrival of the stranger had changed the atmosphere around our house. The man stopped at the foot of our driveway, staring up at the house. He made no move to approach the porch, but simply stood there, his face still hidden in shadow. "That's creepy," Jack whispered, standing up and moving toward the window. "What's he doing?" My stomach tightened with unease. "I don't know, but I don't like it." For several long moments, the man remained motionless, his eyes at least where I assumed his eyes would be fixed on our house. Jack and I exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, I made a decision. "Let's just ignore him. He'll leave if we don't give him any attention," I said, my voice low. Jack nodded in agreement, though neither of us could take our eyes off the man. Suddenly, the figure moved. Slowly, he raised his hand in a stiff, almost puppet-like motion, as if he were waving. But the gesture wasn't friendly, it was eerie, mechanical, like a malfunctioning automaton. He held the wave for several seconds, his arm suspended in the air, before slowly lowering it again. My skin crawled. "Okay, that's it. We're not opening the door." Jack took a step back. "What if he's trying to mess with us? Some kind of prank?" I shook my head. "Doesn't feel like a prank. Something's off." As if hearing our conversation, the man started walking again, this time directly toward the house. His movements were unnervingly slow, each step deliberate and unnaturally measured, as though he had all the time in the world. Without thinking, I rushed to the door, locking it with a loud click just as the stranger reached the bottom of the porch steps. Jack stood frozen behind me, his breath quickening. "What's going on? What's he want?" Jack asked, his voice trembling now. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sign of the man outside. There was a knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. They echoed through the house like the tolling of a distant bell. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Let's just stay quiet. He'll go away." But then the man knocked again, harder this time. It was still measured, precise, but with more force behind it. Each knock seemed to vibrate through the walls. Jack backed away, his eyes wide with fear. What if he doesn't leave? My mind raced. Why was this happening? Who was this man? We hadn't done anything to invite this kind of encounter, hadn't played any pranks, hadn't angered anyone. But this stranger seemed intent on getting our attention. The third knock was the loudest. It sounded like the man was using his fist, the sound echoing through the quiet house like a drumbeat. Jack and I stood frozen, waiting for what would come next. Then silence. The knocking stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. Maybe the man had finally given up. But as I cautiously peeked through the peephole, I felt my blood run cold. The man wasn't on the porch anymore. He was standing at the far end of the yard, staring up at the window where Jack had been standing moments earlier. His face was still hidden in shadow, but now I could see more of his features. His suit was old and frayed, like something dug up from a long-forgotten grave. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his hands. They were too large, too long, with fingers that seemed to stretch unnaturally. "He's out in the yard," I whispered, backing away from the door. "He's just standing there." Jack moved to look out the window again, but I stopped him. "Don't. He's watching us." Jack's face went pale. "What does he want?" I shook my head, unsure. "I don't know. But we're not opening the door." For what felt like hours, we stood there listening to the silence outside. The man didn't move from his spot in the yard, didn't approach the house again. But his presence was suffocating, a weight pressing down on us, making the air in the room feel thick and heavy. "Maybe we should call the police," Jack suggested, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. Yeah, good idea. And I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed the number. But just as I pressed call, the lights in the house flickered. The TV went dark, and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen stopped. The power was out. No, 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 Jack muttered, panic rising in his voice. What's happening? I cursed under my breath. I don't know, just stay calm, we need to. Before I could finish my sentence, there was a scraping sound at the back of the house like nails running down the wall. My heart hammered in my chest. The sound came again, louder this time. Jack and I exchanged wide-eyed glances before bolting for the back door. As we reached it, the back porch light flickered, revealing the silhouette of the man standing just outside the kitchen window. How did he? Jack began, but I didn't wait to hear the rest. I grabbed him by the arm and pulled him toward the stairs. Upstairs. Now we scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door to my bedroom behind us. I locked it, my hands shaking, as Jack paced the room, panic etched across his face. What are we going to do? Jack whispered. He's not going away. I didn't know. We were trapped, the power was out, and a strange man was lurking outside our house. We had no way of knowing what he wanted or how to stop him. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room grew unbearable. The sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and deliberate. The man was inside the house. I held my breath, listening as the footsteps grew louder, ascending the stairs one step at a time. Each creak of the wood felt like a countdown. Jack backed away from the door, his face pale. What if before he could finish, the footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door. The handle rattled, and the door creaked as if under pressure. Then there was a soft knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps, just like before. Jack and I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The door remained closed, but the knock echoed in our minds, a chilling reminder that the stranger hadn't come for candy or tricks. He had come for us, and he wasn't leaving.